Maria had always been known as a quiet and humble woman. She lived in a small, peaceful town surrounded by green fields and narrow, dusty roads. Her house was simple, a tiny wooden cottage with a small garden filled with wildflowers that she cared for every morning. Life had never been easy for her, but she never complained. She believed that every sunrise brought a new chance to be thankful. She worked as a housekeeper for a rich family who owned one of the biggest houses in town. Every day, she cleaned their rooms, washed their dishes, and polished their floors until they shone like glass. While others saw her as just a servant, Maria took pride in her work. She did everything with love and care, never once showing anger or bitterness. People often said she was too quiet, too soft-spoken, but those who looked closely could see a deep sadness hiding behind her gentle smile, long before she became a housekeeper. Maria had a dream. As a young girl, she loved music, especially the sound of the piano. When she was little, she used to walk past the old music school in her town just to hear the faint notes coming from inside. She would close her eyes and imagine herself sitting there, her fingers dancing across the keys, creating melodies that touched people's hearts. Her father, a kind but poor man, once saved enough money to buy her a small keyboard from a second-hand shop. It wasn't much, but to Maria, it was treasure. She practiced every day, teaching herself by ear since they couldn't afford lessons. Her mother used to sit beside her while she played, closing her eyes and smiling softly. One day, her mother would whisper, "The world will hear you play, my little bird." Those words stayed in Maria's heart forever. But dreams, as beautiful as they are, don't always survive in the real world. When Maria was 16, her father fell ill. The family spent everything they had on medicine, but it wasn't enough. After his passing, Maria had to give up her dream and start working to support her mother. The little keyboard gathered dust in a corner, forgotten but never truly abandoned in her heart. Years passed, and Maria grew into a quiet woman who never asked for much. She found work in the wealthy family's home, where her days were long but steady. The house was grand marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and golden-framed paintings on every wall. In the grand living room stood a beautiful piano, shiny and elegant, like the ones she had dreamed of as a child. Whenever she cleaned that room, she would stop for a moment, looking at the piano with longing eyes. She never dared to touch it, fearing she might be scolded or told she didn't belong near such a precious thing. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would gently wipe the keys and imagine how they would sound under her fingers. The memories of her childhood melodies would rise in her mind like soft waves. But then she would sigh and go back to work, reminding herself that those dreams belonged to another life, one that no longer existed. Despite everything, Maria never lost her kindness. She greeted everyone with respect, no matter how they treated her. Some members of the family were kind, while others were arrogant and dismissive. They saw her as invisible, someone who existed only to serve. But Maria never let their words hurt her spirit. She believed that goodness always finds its way back to you, even if people don't notice it right away. Outside of work, her life was simple. She spent her evenings sitting by her small window, sipping tea and watching the stars. Sometimes she would hum the tunes she once played as a child. The sound of her voice mixed with the quiet night air, creating a soft peace that only she could feel. Music still lived inside her, like a secret flame that refused to go out. The people in her neighborhood often said Maria was a mystery. She never gossiped, never argued, and never showed off. She helped others when she could, shared food with the poor, and smiled at children on the street. Everyone respected her, even if they didn't know much about her past. Yet, deep inside, there was still a quiet ache, the longing for the piano she once loved. She sometimes wondered what her life would have been if she had never stopped playing. Maybe she could have been a music teacher, or maybe even a performer on stage. But Maria had learned to accept life as it came. She found beauty in small things: the morning sun, the laughter of children, and the sound of rain tapping on her window. She didn't know that fate was quietly waiting to surprise her, that her buried dream would soon come back to life in the most unexpected way. The world that once ignored her was about to see a side of her no one imagined existed. But for now, she was just Maria, a simple woman with a quiet heart, a forgotten dream, and a story that was about to change everything. It was a bright Saturday evening when the mansion came alive with laughter and music. The wealthy family that Maria worked for was hosting a grand party. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and the sound of clinking glasses and cheerful chatter filled the air. Maria, as always, was busy making sure everything ran perfectly, serving drinks, cleaning tables, and ensuring guests were comfortable. She moved quietly through the crowd, unnoticed as usual, dressed in her plain uniform while everyone else sparkled in silk and jewels. To the guests, she was invisible, just another servant doing her job. But Maria didn't mind. She was used to it. She only wanted the evening to end peacefully so she could go home and rest her tired feet. In the corner of the grand living room stood the same piano she often admired while cleaning. It shone under the golden lights, its white keys gleaming like pearls. A few guests had already tried playing it earlier, clumsy tunes and silly laughter echoing through the room. None of them really knew how to play, but they enjoyed pretending, as Maria passed by carrying a tray of empty glasses. A young woman from the guests, rich, proud, and spoiled, noticed her. She smirked and whispered something to her friends, who burst into quiet giggles. Maria didn't hear at first, but she felt their eyes on her. "Hey, Maria!" The young woman called out with a mocking smile. "You've been walking around all night? Why don't you take a little break and entertain us?" Maria stopped in confusion, unsure what she meant. "Entertain?" She repeated softly, "Yes." Another guest chimed in, laughing. "Play something for us on the piano. You must know a little tune or two, don't you?" The room chuckled. It was clear they weren't serious. They wanted to tease her, not listen to her play. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the tray. "I'm sorry, miss," she said politely. "I don't think that would be appropriate." But her refusal only encouraged them. "Oh, come on," said one of the men in a sharp suit. "Don't be shy. We promise we won't laugh well, maybe just a little." Everyone laughed again, their laughter sharp and cruel. The lady of the house, trying to impress her guests, joined in with a fake smile. "Let her try," she said. "It'll be fun. Who knows? Maybe she'll surprise us." Maria felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and vanish. Every pair of eyes in the room was on her now. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She shook her head and whispered, "Please, ma'am, I really can't enough," said the hostess firmly but not kindly. "It's just a piano, Maria. Sit down and play something. You won't break it." The guests snickered again. Maria looked around helplessly, but there was no escape. The laughter around her felt heavier than the sound of thunder. Slowly, she placed the tray down and walked toward the piano. Her steps were small and hesitant, her breath shallow. As she sat down, she stared at the keys, so white, so perfect. Memories of her childhood rushed back like a flood. Her small keyboard, her father's smile, her mother's soft humming. Her eyes glistened, but she quickly blinked away the tears. The crowd leaned closer, ready to see her fail. Someone whispered, "This should be good." Another chuckled, "Let's see what kind of music a maid knows." Maria took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered uncertainly above the keys. It had been years since she had touched a real piano. Her hands were no longer soft and smooth. They were worn from hard work, rough from years of scrubbing and polishing. She doubted they even remembered how to play. For a moment, the room grew quiet. The mocking smiles waited for her first note. Maria's heart raced. She could walk away and face more laughter, or she could stay and take one small chance. A part of her whispered, "Play, Maria, just once. For yourself." She closed her eyes, letting silence fill the air. And then, softly, her fingers pressed the keys. A single note rang out clear, gentle, and full of emotion. The room stilled. She played another, and then another. Her hands began to move on their own, remembering the rhythm her mind had long forgotten. The melody grew stronger, richer, no longer the trembling of a servant, but the music of someone who had loved the piano deeply, the guests who had laughed moments earlier now watched in stunned silence. The air seemed to change. Each note carried something raw and beautiful, sadness, strength, and peace, all woven together. The woman they thought was too simple, too ordinary, was creating something extraordinary. As she continued to play, Maria forgot where she was. The noise, the laughter, the people, they disappeared. Only the music remained. It was her world, her story, her soul pouring through the keys. When the final note faded, the room stayed silent. No one moved. The same guests who once mocked her now sat frozen, their faces filled with disbelief. One woman wiped away a tear. Another whispered, "That was beautiful." Maria slowly stood, her heart still racing. She didn't look at anyone. She simply bowed her head slightly and said, "Thank you." And just like that, the simple housekeeper walked away quietly, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget what they had just witnessed. They had called her to be mocked, but instead, she had reminded them what true grace sounded like. Asterisk for a few seconds, the entire room was frozen in silence. The echo of the last note still floated in the air like a whisper that refused to fade. Maria sat there, her hands resting gently on the piano keys, afraid to move. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she could almost hear it. She couldn't believe what she had just done. For years, she had buried her love for music deep inside her heart, but in that one unexpected moment, it had all come rushing back. Her fingers had remembered what her mind had forgotten. Slowly, she lifted her eyes. Around her stood a crowd of people who had invited her to play only to laugh at her. But now, none of them were laughing. Their faces were different, confused, surprised, even touched. A few guests were whispering softly. Others stood motionless, almost embarrassed by their earlier cruelty. Maria took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling, as if she had been holding her breath for years. Inside her, something changed. The fear that had always lived in her heart, the fear of being small, of being unseen, began to melt away. For the first time in a long time, she felt something powerful: courage. The sound of slow, hesitant clapping broke the silence. It came from an older gentleman near the front, who had tears in his eyes. He stood and said softly, "That was extraordinary." Soon others began to clap too, though awkwardly at first. Within seconds, the whole room filled with applause. The same people who had mocked her moments ago were now cheering her. Maria stood up slowly, unsure what to do. She didn't smile widely or bow proudly. She simply nodded, shyly, her eyes lowered. She felt overwhelmed, almost dizzy. It wasn't pride that filled her heart, but peace, a calmness she hadn't known in years. When the music stopped and the applause faded, the hostess of the mansion, the very woman who had forced her to play, approached her. Her face looked pale and uneasy. "Maria," she said softly, "I didn't know you could play like that." Maria smiled gently. "It's been many years," she replied. "I used to play when I was young." The hostess didn't know what to say. Her guests were still murmuring in amazement, whispering about the maid who played like an artist. As Maria turned to leave the piano, her gaze fell upon the shining keys once more. They looked different now, no longer unreachable, no longer symbols of a dream lost. They were now her voice, her strength, her truth. That night, as the party continued, Maria went back to her duties quietly. But something about her presence was different. Her steps were lighter. Her eyes had a quiet glow. The guests who once ignored her now looked at her with newfound respect. Some smiled politely as she passed. Others even thanked her for the performance. But Maria didn't care about their praise. What mattered was what she had discovered inside herself, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to face it later that night. When the house grew quiet and everyone had gone to bed, Maria returned to the living room. The lights were dim. The piano sat silently in the corner, waiting. She walked over and gently touched its surface, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. She sat down again, alone this time, and played softly, just for herself. The melody was slow and peaceful, filled with warmth. She closed her eyes and smiled. Each note she played seemed to carry her soul, as if the piano understood her better than anyone ever had in that stillness. She remembered her father's face, his gentle hands clapping when she was a child. She remembered her mother's voice whispering, "One day, the world will hear you." Tears rolled down Maria's cheeks, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of release. For years, she had hidden her music because she thought the world wouldn't care. But now she knew something beautiful. Talent never dies. It simply waits patiently, quietly, for the right moment to shine again, as the final note faded into the night. Maria whispered to herself, "You did it." "Papa," I played again. Outside, the moonlight streamed through the window, casting a silver glow across her face. She looked peaceful, like a woman who had finally found herself again after years of being lost. The next morning, the family members spoke softly about the night before. The guests couldn't stop talking about the maid with the magic hands. Some didn't believe it really happened. Others said it was the most moving moment they had ever seen. But Maria said nothing. She just went about her chores as usual, humming a soft tune under her breath. Yet deep inside her, something had changed forever. The shy, quiet woman who once lived in fear now carried the music of her soul wherever she went. And though the people around her might forget the song she played, Maria knew she never would. Because in that single moment of courage, in that choice to play, despite the laughter, she had reclaimed her voice, her past, and her heart. The following evening, the mansion felt unusually quiet. The laughter and noise from the party were gone, but the memory of Maria's piano playing still lingered in the air. It was as if the walls themselves remembered the melody. Every servant whispered about her in awe, still unable to believe what they had witnessed. Maria, however, tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. She swept the floors, cleaned the tables, and went about her chores silently. But deep inside, her heart was still dancing with the sound of music. The melody she had played had awakened something that had slept inside her for years. That day, the master of the house, Mr. Collins, called her into the study. He was a strict man who rarely smiled. Maria stood at the doorway nervously, unsure if she had done something wrong. "Come in, Maria," he said in a calm voice. "Sit down." She hesitated but obeyed. He studied her face for a moment before speaking. "I heard what happened last night. Everyone's talking about you." Maria looked down. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Trouble," he repeated, surprised. "You didn't cause trouble, Maria. You gave everyone something to remember." His eyes softened. That was remarkable. Maria didn't know how to respond. Compliments from people like him were rare. He continued, "I want you to play again this weekend. We're hosting another dinner. This time, you'll perform properly, not as entertainment for jokes, but as our guest pianist. Her eyes widened. "Me, sir." "But you're not just anything, Maria," he interrupted gently. "You have a gift, and gifts should be shared." Maria's lips trembled as she nodded slowly. She didn't know what to say, but her heart was full. The thought of playing again, truly playing, both excited and scared her. That weekend arrived sooner than she expected. The mansion was again filled with elegant guests, but this time the atmosphere felt different. Word had spread about the maid who played like a maestro, and everyone was curious to see her again. Maria wore a simple blue dress the hostess had given her. It wasn't expensive, but it made her look graceful and calm. She stood near the piano, her hands trembling slightly. The lights dimmed and the soft murmur of conversation faded into silence. Then she began to play. The first note drifted through the air like a whisper of wind. It was gentle, yet full of life. Her fingers moved with confidence now, guided by emotion rather than fear. The melody she played was one she had written herself long ago. Back when she was a young girl with dreams bigger than her world. Each note told a story of her childhood joy, her struggles, her pain, and her hope. The music wasn't fancy or complicated. It was honest, pure, and real, and that made it powerful. The guests were mesmerized. The same people who once laughed now sat with tears in their eyes. They could feel her soul in every sound. The room seemed to hold its breath as she played. Even the chandeliers seemed to glow softer. As if listening to Dot as the piece grew, so did her strength. She no longer looked like a servant sitting behind the piano. She looked like an artist, a woman reborn in her music. Her fingers glided across the keys like a river flowing over stones. Smooth and unstoppable by the time she reached the final part. Her eyes were closed, her expression peaceful. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about setting herself free. And when she played the last note, a long, delicate sound that lingered in the air. It felt like time had stopped. Then came the silence, deep, powerful, and almost holy. No one moved. No one dared to speak. And then, suddenly, applause erupted, loud, thunderous, and real. People stood up, clapping, cheering, some even crying. Maria stood slowly, bowing her head in gratitude. Her eyes glistened, not from pride, but from overwhelming emotion. The applause washed over her like a wave of warmth she had never felt before. After the performance, guests approached her one by one, thanking her, praising her, asking about her story. But Maria only smiled humbly and said, "It was just a simple tune from my heart." The hostess, the same woman who had once mocked her, came forward, eyes filled with guilt. "Maria," she said quietly, "I don't have words to say how sorry I am for how I treated you before." Maria looked at her kindly. "You don't need to be sorry," she said softly. "If that moment hadn't happened, I might never have found my courage again." That night, as the guests left, Maria sat once more at the piano. The house was quiet again. She touched the keys gently and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me." She played one last song, slow, sweet, and full of gratitude. It was not for the crowd. Not for praise, but for herself, for her parents. And for the little girl who once dreamed of this moment. Outside, the stars shone brighter than ever. As if the universe itself was clapping for her, Maria had walked into that room as a servant. But she walked out as something far greater. A woman who had rediscovered her soul through the music she thought she had lost forever. Asterisk. The night of Maria's performance had changed something in everyone, especially in the hearts of those who had laughed at her before. For days, the mansion felt different. The servants whispered softly about her talent, and even the guests who once looked down on her now spoke her name with respect. But beneath all the admiration, there was also silence, a silence filled with guilt and realization, the young woman who had mocked Maria the most. Clara couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Maria sitting at the piano, calm, graceful, her fingers creating magic. Clara had thought it would be funny to humiliate her, to show off her own power and privilege. But instead, she had been humbled in front of everyone. The sound of Maria's music haunted her. It wasn't just beautiful. It was powerful, like it carried every emotion Clara had forgotten how to feel. For the first time, she began to see how cruel her actions had been. The next morning, she walked into the garden where Maria was watering the plants. The air smelled of roses and fresh soil. Maria turned when she heard footsteps, her expression gentle as always. "Good morning, Miss Clara." She greeted softly. Clara hesitated. Her throat felt dry. She had rehearsed what she wanted to say all night, but now the words stuck. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "Maria, I need to say something." Maria tilted her head slightly. "Waiting. I was wrong," Clara said, her voice trembling. "That night, I only wanted to make fun of you. I didn't know what you were capable of. You were incredible. And I'm ashamed." Maria smiled faintly, setting down her watering can. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But there's no need to be ashamed. We all learn in our own time." Her calmness made Clara's eyes fill with tears. "How can you be so kind after what I did?" she asked. Maria looked toward the sky. "Because holding anger only keeps us trapped," she said gently. "I forgave you before the first note ended." Those words hit Clara harder than any scolding could. In that moment, she realized that true strength didn't come from pride or power. It came from grace. Later that week, Mr. Collins invited Maria to play again, this time for a charity dinner attended by important guests from the city. She hesitated at first, feeling unworthy of such attention, but he insisted. "Your music touches people, Maria. That's something money can't buy," he said firmly. When the night came, Maria once again sat at the grand piano. This time, there were no mocking faces, no laughter, only anticipation and quiet admiration. Clara stood among the guests, watching with pride rather than jealousy. Maria began to play, and once again the room was filled with a melody that seemed to come from heaven itself. The music rose and fell like waves, strong, emotional, and pure. Some guests closed their eyes, others held their breath. When she finished, there wasn't a single dry eye in the room. That performance changed not only how people saw Maria, but also how they saw themselves. The wealthy hostess who once saw her as just a maid now treated her with deep respect. The servants looked up to her as a symbol of courage. Even the guests who had never spoken to her before approached her with admiration. But Maria remained the same, humble, gentle, and calm. She never let the praise go to her head. "I am only doing what I love," she would say with a soft smile. Days turned into weeks, and her story began to spread beyond the mansion. People in town whispered about the simple woman who played the piano like an angel. Some even came by hoping to hear her music. Yet Maria stayed grounded. She continued her chores, helped the poor, and lived simply, as she always had. But something beautiful had happened. Those who once mocked her were now inspired by her. Clara began to volunteer at a local orphanage, saying she wanted to do something meaningful. The hostess treated her servants with more kindness. Even the arrogant guests who once laughed began to speak more gently to the staff. Maria's music hadn't just entertained them, it had changed them. It broke their pride and replaced it with understanding. One afternoon, as Maria sat in the garden playing softly on a small portable keyboard gifted to her by Mr. Collins, Clara came again. She listened quietly before saying, "Maria, you taught me more in one night than all my years of schooling." Maria looked up with a warm smile. "Music can speak when words fail," she said softly. Clara nodded. Yes, but I think your kindness spoke even louder. The sun set slowly behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Maria's melody floated through the air, gentle as the wind. In that moment, Clara realized something profound. The woman she once mocked had given her the greatest gift of all, humility, and though Maria never sought attention or fame, she had unknowingly become a symbol of grace, proof that true greatness doesn't need to shout. It simply shines quietly, like a single light that warms every heart it touches. Years passed, but the story of the simple woman who played the piano like a dream never faded. People still whispered about her talent in the town square, and some even traveled from far places hoping to meet her. But Maria never thought of herself as famous to her. She was still the same quiet woman who loved music, flowers, and peace. The grand mansion she once worked in had changed too. The family treated their workers kindly now. Laughter no longer sounded arrogant, and every evening, soft piano notes floated from the living room where Maria sometimes played. The place that once held cruelty now felt filled with warmth. Maria still lived in her small cottage at the edge of town. The piano she played at the mansion had become her companion, not made of wood and strings, but of memories and emotions. Mr. Collins, the master of the house, had gifted her a beautiful upright piano as a token of gratitude. It stood near her window, sunlight falling on its keys every morning, every day. After finishing her chores, Maria would sit by the piano and play. She played not for the world, not for applause, but for her heart. Her melodies carried peace, hope, and gratitude. They sounded like whispers of her past, the struggles, the pain, and the healing. Sometimes children from the village would gather outside her cottage to listen. They would sit quietly on the grass, enchanted by the sound. Maria always smiled at them through the window. When she finished, she'd step outside and say, "Do you want to learn?" Their little faces would light up as they nodded eagerly. That's how her new journey began. She started teaching piano lessons to the children who couldn't afford music school, just like she couldn't when she was young. She didn't charge a single coin. Music should be free for those who love it, she would say. Her small home soon filled with laughter, clumsy notes, and bright dreams. One afternoon, as Maria sat teaching a young girl named Lily, she noticed something familiar in the child's eyes, that same hunger for learning, that same quiet fire she once had. Lily struggled at first, but Maria was patient. "Don't rush," she told her gently. "The piano will speak when your heart listens." Years later, Lily would go on to become a professional pianist, performing in grand halls and speaking proudly of the woman who taught her without asking for anything in return. Whenever she played, she began her concerts with the words, "This one is for Maria, the woman who taught me what true music means." Back in the little town, Maria grew older, her hair turning silver like the moonlight she loved. But her spirit remained as young as ever. She still woke early, made tea, and played gentle tunes as the sun rose. Her neighbors often said, "When Maria plays, the whole morning feels alive." One evening, Clara, the same woman who once mocked her, visited her after many years. She had changed, too. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by humility and calm. She brought flowers and a soft smile. "I never forgot what you said to me, Maria," Clara began. "You told me not to hold on to anger. That day, you taught me more than anyone ever had." Maria laughed softly. "Life teaches all of us, Clara. I only reminded you of what was already inside you." They sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold. The years of pain, guilt, and regret had turned into friendship and peace. Before leaving, Clara asked, "Do you ever regret that you didn't chase a big life? Fame, concerts, a stage?" Maria looked at her piano and smiled. "No," she said softly. The biggest stage I ever needed was the hearts I touched. That night, after Clara left, Maria played one final song. The melody was slow and full of light, a goodbye song, gentle and warm. She closed her eyes as she played, feeling her heart steady and full. As the last note faded into the quiet night, Maria whispered, "Thank you for letting me live my dream, even in small ways." The moon shone through her window, casting a silver glow on the piano keys. It was as if the heavens themselves were listening.